Hello and welcome to Dr. Dawn Richards' presentation of patient engagement in research, why and how. I am Emily Sirtich, patient advocate and patient engagement lead of the COVID-19 Global Rheumatology Alliance. I will be co-moderating today with Lena Anderson, author and patient advocate. As a reminder, if you have questions for the presenter, please type it into the Q&A. Do not leave your questions in the chat. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Use the live chat widget located on the console to interact with your fellow attendees. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Dawn Richards. Dawn Richards, PhD, lives with rheumatoid arthritis and is volunteer vice president of the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance. She advocates for arthritis awareness, access to treatment, patient participation in decision-making, and as research collaborators, and the importance of research. She describes herself as an exercise fiend, which nicely balances her love of baking. Dr. Richards, we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks a lot, Emily. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate being here today, especially after such a wonderful keynote from Dr. Christine Chambers and Isabel Jordan. You're going to hear a lot of the same messages reiterated today. So I've got my Twitter handle here if you would like to tweet anything from the slides. I also wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement that I live and work on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. So to start off with, this isn't meant to be tongue-in-cheek. I truly believe that my most important disclosure is the fact that I live with rheumatoid arthritis, and I've also put my more traditional disclosures here. The one that probably comes to mind most today is the fact that I do consult for CIHR's Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis, and a lot of what I'll be talking about today comes from resources that IMHA has developed. Next is our learning objectives. So these have been set up for accreditation for researchers, clinicians, and others, but I want to encourage the fact that for patient partners who are part of the call too, we can certainly think about these learning objectives. And I'd really challenge all of you as I am talking today, even right from the learning objectives, to think about a specific project you're working on, whether it's as a patient partner, a researcher, a trainee, as a clinician, and try and apply what I'm speaking about today to your own experiences. I think that helps enrich what I'm trying to get across today, and also helps you frame it in the perspective of something that's really contextual to you. So we're going to do some boring stuff. We're going to talk about definitions related to patient engagement, but hopefully also, in addition to you being able to do that at the end, I hope that you'll be able to think of at least 3 good reasons about why you may wish to engage as a patient partner or engage patient partners in your research. And think about some ways, again, you may wish to engage as a patient partner or with patient partners on your research team. And probably you've already got some really great ones from the keynote presentation. So getting on the same page, these definitions come from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, or CIHR, and I just want to use them to set context. So CIHR defines patients fairly broadly. It's not just people who live with a disease or a condition or have a healthcare experience, but it can also include their caregivers, including family and friends. And when you think about it, some of those people inside the patient's bubble, so to speak, they can be really affected by those conditions, and they're going to bring really unique experiences related to being friends with those individuals or being family members of those individuals. In terms of patient engagement, it's actually about meaningful collaboration, not just collaboration. And it's really patients being partners throughout projects, right? From how the project is run or governed to priority setting, helping develop research questions. And we're going to talk a little bit later, because you may look at those and say, well, I don't think patient partners can do that. And I'm going to ask you to park that attitude for now, if that is the way that you think, because we're going to come back to it about not making assumptions about who patients are or the skills that they can bring to your project or team. Lastly, patient-oriented research. That's really intended to encompass a continuum of research. It focuses on things that are important to patients and important for them to measure. And the research is done by a different kind of research team. So if you're a researcher right now, you probably think, you often are surrounded by your trainees, research associates, postdocs, etc. And here in patient-oriented research, that's going to include patient partners. It might include decision makers and policy makers as well. So it kind of broadens the expanse of the team. And the hope is that you achieve something greater with those different perspectives than you would otherwise. Okay, so next we're going to set up the context, and I'm going to ask that a short video is shown. The video has been developed by IMHA, and I want to send out a thanks to Jillian Newman and Dr. Debbie Feldman, who worked on the video with me. And it's going to kind of set up a scenario for you that we're going to talk about throughout the rest of the conversation here. So I'll ask that the video be played next.
We're going to introduce ourselves to get started. Maybe I should go first? I'm George, a senior basic scientist, and my lab studies the biomarkers of inflammation. Over to you, Penny.
Okay, I'm Penny. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 22. I'm a financial analyst, and I volunteer with the Arthritis Society and as a patient for first-year medical students. I'm really passionate about science and research, and I do CrossFit 3 times a week.
I'm Tom. I'm in my 4th year PhD in Dr. Black's lab.
I'm Dr. Jean, rheumatologist. I have a master's degree and protected time for my research.
I've got to get out of here.
Well, let's talk about the research. We're looking at extreme exercisers and non-exercisers and their markers for inflammation and cytokines like CRP, interleukin IL-6, IL-10, and tumor necrosis factor alpha.
I'm really looking forward to participating. I think this is really helpful to understand the impact of high-intensity activities for people who have arthritis.
Yeah. Well, we have 3 weeks to the deadline.
3 weeks? I don't know about that for me, especially with everything else going on. How am I going to have time to read up on everything, to learn what my role is?
I'm not really sure what Penny brings to this. She's not familiar with my work or the science behind research on arthritis.
I don't know how this applies to research, but I do know people worry about how high-intensity exercise affects their arthritis.
Why don't we talk about how we could characterize this worry?
That could be interesting. We can maybe look at ways to measure that.
I think measures are pretty well documented already. We don't need to go back there.
Well, it seems to me that what Penny is highlighting would be important to the CIHR, with these being, patient-reported outcomes and things that really matter to patients.
I mean, this could help us with engagement and encouraging people to participate.
Oh, patient-reported outcomes. That makes sense in terms of framing it for CIHR in this competition.
I definitely think that if we're measuring things important to patients, there's other people I know who would be interested in participating.
I really like that idea. Yeah, thanks for your input and personal experience. I really think that'll help us with recruitment.
And I agree, Penny. You've got some excellent ideas and you're super well connected. Do you still run information sessions for people with arthritis? Could we participate in a session?
Why not?
Maybe Penny can bring some important information to the table. She seems willing to put in the hard work.
Well, it seems like we have some good ideas, and Tom and I can take and integrate them into the proposal and share them back.
We can add our comments to it, and I'm sure this version is going to be much better than when we started this meeting this morning.
I mean, this is a whole new way of thinking about research for me. This is awesome. We're all bringing a different viewpoint and we're all figuring it out together. I mean, we're being accountable for the research dollars and the people whose lives we hope to help.
Okay, so you might look at that video and you think that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I can tell you that if you're a patient partner, you can often identify with a few of the themes there, maybe not being heard, not feeling like you've found your place at the table. So let's talk about the why for patient engagement. Hopefully that video helped you understand that Penny, as the patient, was bringing a different perspective to the research team. And by the end of things, all of the members of the research team were starting to appreciate that she brought these lived and relevant experiences that none of them necessarily had not living with arthritis. I think Penny did a really good job of helping the team understand some of the research priorities and outcomes that were important to her and others like her. And she also was connected to her community. And some patients may be part of formal groups or just members of social media groups. And so we're often connected to others within our community. This can always lead to new and different types of partnerships. And you could see that the trainee at the end was really excited about kind of the light bulb went off for him, that he saw a different way to do his research and a different way to learn. So hopefully those are 6 reasons that kind of came across from the video. And, you can sit there and think, well, she's really drinking the Kool-Aid on this one. Of course, she's going to tell us that this is all fine and dandy. But I want you to also see that there are a lot of other people out there in the community who feel the same way. And so what I did just over a week ago is I put this out to Twitter, and I asked people what their why was, of whether they were a patient partner or a researcher, and why they chose to be part of research teams. And so from the patient perspective here, you'll see that there are a number of different people, and I'm not going to read them all, but you can have a glance at this. The one thing for me that really resonates here is, Isabel is included in this tweet. She was part of the keynote earlier. And she talks about the different perspectives that people bring and the different kind of information that they bring. Virginia's right underneath her, and I hear this a lot from patient partners, is that she's had a really bad experience in her health care journey, if you want to call it that, and she wants to prevent others from having to go through the same. So she wants to do whatever she can as part of a research team to prevent others from going through that. That's really a thread that's woven throughout many of these other patient reasons for why they're part of a research team. My good colleague Lori Proul talks about that too, that she's gone through a lot of miserable experiences, and somehow she wants to find meaning here. And Claire Snyman down in the bottom left-hand corner talks about bringing the day-to-day realities of lived experience that can sometimes be fairly brutal to the research table, and so that can be unpacked and we can learn from that. These tiles are also from more patient partners. So again, lots of things that are coming through in terms of themes here. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, Jim Elliott actually talks about something he heard a clinician say, which is that patient public involvement takes the guesswork out of research, which I think is really nicely put. I did have some researchers and trainees respond to my tweet out as well. And some of them are at the conference today, so you can take a look at what they've what they've written. And in particular, I really like what Dr. Manoj Lalu down in the bottom left-hand corner says. And he says, we have no issues with not questioning at all why the statistician has to be part of the team, why the methodologist is part of the team. So why do we question the expertise and the opinions and insights that patients bring, who are ultimately the group that's going to be participating in the study that's developed? So I want to send a really big heartfelt thanks to everyone who responded, because I think this helps show that it's not just my opinion about the why here, but there's lots of people out there that really have embraced patient engagement and research and why it should be done. So next I want to pivot a little bit to the how. The other thing that I wanted to impress upon you is, I hear lots of people say, well, patient engagement can be done for clinical research, so research that involves people, But for basic science, I'm not so convinced. And so from the video, you saw that the research team was actually a fairly basic research team. And yeah, the patient actually had things to contribute. And I don't want you to shy away from that if you're in the basic sciences. Again, as we go through the how, I'm going to ask you to think about a specific project that you're working on and how you might even just take one or two of these things that I'm hoping to impart upon you so that you could take it back to do your own work. So in terms of how, we're going to talk about co-create. We heard this morning in the keynote. I'm going to ask you to not make assumptions, or if you do have assumptions, just park them and see how you might bust those. We're going to talk about communication, and that's not just communicating with your patient partners, but also a theme that came out this morning is communicating how you've worked with patient partners so you can contribute to the science of patient engagement and the literature around this. And last but not least, we're going to talk about acknowledge. So we could talk about all kinds of things within the how. I've just chosen kind of these 4 buckets so that I don't overwhelm you too much, and I can give you little gems that I hope you can put into your research. Okay, so I'm going to plug that many of the resources, if not all of them, that I'm going to talk about are on the IMHA website. We've developed over the past couple of years a patient engagement in research resource page. And the intention there is to really provide practical documents and guidance to help you do this, because I know you're all going to walk away from the presentations today and do this, or at least try. Please tell me you'll try. And so everything that I'm going to talk about, you can go back here and find. We talk about planning for your project, carrying out your project, evaluating your project, and some other things too. So I'd really encourage you to visit the page. Let's talk about co-create. So one is creating a safe space, whether that's introducing yourself without titles, whether that's making sure at meetings that your patient partners actually get to speak before other people, everybody gets to introduce themselves. Those all go with creating a safe space. I really feel strongly that your job on the research team is to listen. I understand that sometimes patient partners will need supports to learn about what research is and to feel like they can contribute better to the team, but they don't have to be a researcher, because that's your job to formulate research questions from what you hear from them, from their everyday experiences, from the things that drive them bonkers about their healthcare experiences. It's your job to listen and then to dialogue with them, to ask them more about that, and to come up with research questions. Your job's also to support them in the co-creation. So, not everybody wants to be part of Zoom meetings. They don't want to be part of large team meetings. Maybe they just want an email from you once in a while, or maybe they want a text to know that things are going okay, or maybe in the days before COVID, some people really like to meet in person. But again, that's up to you to figure out how you can best support them. And, Isabel said it really nicely in the keynote. Just ask them. Don't be afraid to just ask them and see what works for them. You might have to help them with courses and other things, but again, ask them how you can support them to be part of the team. And I can't stress this enough about starting early with your patient partners. So you saw in the video, it's 3 weeks to grant deadline. Oh my God, this particular CIHR application needs for us to have patients. Not the best way to start a partnership, not the best way to start co-creation. So start before the grant call comes out. Start building relationships with people and chatting with them about things. The resource I'm going to highlight here is from the Newfoundland Spore Support Unit. It's an awesome checklist. It walks you through all the kinds of things you'll need to prepare for co-creation. And it's basically a checklist. And I'll be quite honest with you, if you can't take an hour or so to sit down, walk through a checklist about how and why you're going to engage patient partners, then I really would ask you to reconsider if you think this is the right thing for you to be doing. Okay, this nasty word of making assumptions, like I've mentioned a couple of times, it asks you not to assume anything about your patient partners. I encourage you to build relationships with them. So I talk a lot about the fact that I'm not just my disease. I often wear that label when I come to a table. But I describe myself as a wife, an entrepreneur, a baker, an exerciser, a scientist, lots of other things before I get to the patient label. And I'd argue that probably many patients see patient pretty far down their label list. So who are they? What are their skills and interests? Probably really importantly, what's going on in their lives? So what motivates them? What drives them? What don't you know about that can really help you understand them and know that they're actually people? I'm going to highlight a paper by Dr. Richard Hovey. Richard is a very eloquent writer. He is a faculty member at McGill, and importantly, he lives with chronic pain, and he's very public about his experiences. So this paper is called Occasionally a Patient, Always a Person. And so please remember that with your patient partners when you engage them. Isabel put a really nice segue into this for me. Have you budgeted? And, this isn't something that you just slap on to a grant off the side of your desk, but have you budgeted the time to get to know your patient partners, the time to engage them in your project? Because again, firing something off to them on a Friday and seeing you need it back by Monday morning isn't the greatest approach. And do you have resources? That might be money to compensate them. That might be something else. So I'd ask you to think about those things. Here I'm going to highlight a budgeting tool from the Manitoba Spore Support Unit. They've actually got a spreadsheet on all the things you should consider in your patient engagement budget, and that can really help you develop this for a grant application or something else, so that you can understand some of those actual costs that might be associated with this. Next, we're going to move on to communicate. And I know I'm kind of blasting through things, but I hope you're still thinking about that project in the back of your mind and thinking about how you're going to apply some of these things to it. So for communication, what are your patient partners' preferences? Again, do they want to be on Zoom calls? Hopefully once we're vaccinated or once we can get together in person again, would they prefer to meet in person? What does this look like for them? Who's their point person on the team? I often hear patient partners say, well, I don't want to bother this researcher that I'm working with. They're really busy, and they should not be burdened with those kinds of thoughts. It's more, who can I get to if I have questions from the research team? Are their responsibilities clear? Do you know what kind of time your patient partners can put into things? Do they know whose job it is to do what on the research team? And I often see this happen, is that researchers think nothing's really happening or there's no big news to relay to your patient partners. But I encourage you to over-communicate because for many patient partners, research is new. They don't know the lulls. They don't know how long things take. And so keep them informed, whether that's an email every month, whether it's a quick call every month. Just let them know that you haven't forgot about them, the project is still continuing, and have a conversation with them. Have a virtual coffee with them. Remember, it's about relationship building. So here I'm going to highlight a resource from Health Quality Ontario. They're in the healthcare space, but they've got great resources that also parlay to the research space. And they've got all kinds of great tips here for communication, including thanking your patient partners throughout the project. Last, I'm going to quickly talk about acknowledgement, and again, highlight one of the papers that Isabel and myself and others have written about compensation. I often see this one overlooked, and as Isabel said, not all of your patient partners will want to be paid, but some of them might want for that, or there are non-monetary ways to compensate as well, and the paper will explain lots of that to you. And are authorship or acknowledgement in publications, presentations, etc. possible? So you saw that in action this morning at the keynote, that there was a co-presentation. And this should be a conversation that happens early in the partnership. And so again, this is another resource that I've been part of with the SPORE Chronic Pain Network, where we've taken the criteria for authorship from the International Committee of Journal Medical Editors. And there are 4 criteria for authorship, and we've broken these down in the patient engagement world. And maybe really importantly, I'd ask you to make sure that your patient partner is okay with being named publicly as a patient partner. Most are, but I think that's really important, that you find something that makes sense for them if they're not okay with that. So lastly, again, just coming back to the how, we talked about co-create, we talked about not assuming things, we talked about some kind of best practices for communication and acknowledgement, and all of these resources can be found on the CIHR IMHA site. And I think, one thing to think about here is many patients use the mantra, nothing about us without us. So, there's nothing worse than being studied but not being at the table. I've heard other people say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I think it's something like that. So I'm going to leave you with that. And thank you for your time. It was really a pleasure to be here. And again, I'll just leave my email address and my Twitter handle. I'm always happy to communicate with people offline. So thanks very much. And I hope you can take one or two gems forward with you. And I'd always be happy to hear from you as well to see how you might have taken something here that you learned and used it in your own work. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Dawn. I think we are running a little bit late, so we are not able to have the Q&A session for this presentation, but we encourage anyone who has questions to attend the panel at 2:45 Eastern Time for to ask your questions of Dr. Richards or anyone else at that time. Thank you so much, and over to you, Emily.
I would like to also thank Dr. Don Richards for joining us today. And again, speakers will be available to answer questions in the panel discussion. This concludes our presentation. For the next presentation, please go back to the agenda and access the session from there. Thank you to everybody.